In a small suburban neighborhood, 13-year-old Emma Carter quietly navigates a life full of unspoken tensions. While her art offers her a safe haven, the walls of her home seem to close in with every passing day. Her older brother Ryan is spiraling out of control. His anger, bad decisions, and growing recklessness threaten to tear their family apart. Emma, caught between her parents' exhaustion and Ryan's volatile behavior, feels invisible, powerless, and burdened by secrets too heavy for her to carry alone. But everything changes after a heated family confrontation exposes the cracks in their fragile unity. With Ryan's actions spiraling toward devastating consequences, Emma faces a difficult choice: stay silent or risk speaking up to save not only herself but the people she loves most. Along the way, unexpected allies, a caring teacher, a wise neighbor, and her own artwork offer her the courage to confront her fears. The quiet hum of the suburban neighborhood was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the chilly autumn breeze. Inside the modest two-bedroom house on Maple Street, 13-year-old Emma Carter sat cross-legged on her twin bed. Her room was her sanctuary, though small and sparsely decorated. A collection of well-worn paperbacks lined the single shelf above her desk, and her sketch pad lay open on her lap. She was carefully shading a drawing of a willow tree, its branches sweeping low as though burdened by unseen weight. The muffled sounds of her parents' voices filtered through the thin walls. At first, she ignored them, focusing instead on the pencil in her hand, but their tone grew sharper. Emma put her pencil down, her chest tightening. She had grown used to their arguments over the past few months, but tonight it felt different, more urgent. "Ryan, what were you thinking?" Her mother's voice broke through the barrier of plaster. "I told you I needed it," came the voice of her 17-year-old brother Ryan. It was tight with defiance, and Emma could imagine the glare on his face. "That money was for rent," her father shot back, his voice strained with exhaustion. Emma slid off the bed, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. She crept to her door, opening it just a crack. The hallway light was dim, but she could make out the shadows of her family gathered in the living room. "Do not blame me," Ryan snapped, crossing his arms. "Maybe if you both work more hours, we wouldn't be in this mess." Her mother's voice broke. "Ryan, we're doing everything we can. I pick up double shifts at the diner. And your father—" "Stop it," her father interrupted. "This is not about us. This is about you stealing from your family." Emma's heart sank. She pressed her forehead against the door frame, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She knew Ryan had been in trouble before: missed curfews, reckless parties, but this felt different. Ryan scoffed loudly. "Oh, and I guess perfect little Emma is going to chime in too?" Emma froze. Her brother's words felt like arrows, even though she hadn't said anything. "Leave her out of this," their mother said, her voice trembling. Ryan sneered. "Of course. Emma, the golden child. You all expect her to fix everything while I'm just the screw-up, right?" Emma shrank back into her room, shutting the door softly behind her. Her hands trembled as she sat back on her bed. The sketch pad lay forgotten beside her. She stared at the blank wall opposite her bed, trying to block out the rising tension from the other room. Her parents loved her, she knew that, but lately, their love had felt stretched thin, like an old sweater full of holes. Ryan, once her hero, now seemed like a stranger. Emma couldn't understand how someone she had looked up to could act so selfishly. The argument raged on for another half hour before the house fell into an uneasy silence. Emma stayed in her room, her body stiff with tension. She didn't want to see Ryan or face the looks on her parents' faces. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. Before she could respond, the door opened, and Ryan leaned against the frame. His tall figure blocked out the light from the hallway, casting a shadow across the room. "You heard everything, didn't you?" he asked, his tone accusatory. Emma hesitated, unsure what to say. "I didn't mean to." Ryan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "It doesn't matter," he said, brushing off her words. "Just don't make it worse." "Ryan, why did you do it?" she asked softly. His expression hardened. "You don't get it, do you? You're the favorite. Mom and Dad bend over backward for you while I'm always the problem. I needed that money." "For what?" Emma whispered. Ryan didn't answer. Instead, He crossed the room in 2 steps and grabbed her sketch pad. "Is this what you're always hiding in here?" he said, flipping through the pages carelessly. "Your little drawings? Give it back." Emma lunged forward, but Ryan held it above her head. "You think this will fix anything? You think drawing trees and whatever else you do will make things better?" He tossed the sketch pad onto the floor, the pages scattering. Tears stung Emma's eyes as she dropped to her knees, gathering the loose sheets. Ryan's words echoed in her mind, each one slicing into her like a knife. "Just stay out of it, Emma," Ryan muttered before leaving the room. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the argument over and over. Her chest felt heavy, as if all the weight of her family's struggles had settled squarely on her shoulders. Emma didn't know what to do. She wanted to help her parents, to make things better, but she felt so small, so powerless. Finally, she sat up and reached for her sketch pad. Some of the pages were crumpled, the marks from her pencil smudged, but she ignored them. She turned to a blank page and let her hand move. She drew a girl standing under a storm cloud, her arms stretched out to hold it back. Around her were jagged lines representing chaos, but the girl remained steady. Emma didn't know why she drew it, but when she finished, she felt a tiny bit lighter. In the morning, Emma woke to find the house quiet. Her parents had already left for work, and Ryan was nowhere to be seen. She got dressed quickly and grabbed her backpack, tucking her sketch pads safely inside. School felt like a blur until her art class in the afternoon. The room smelled faintly of paint and charcoal, and Emma found comfort in the familiar environment. She sat at her usual spot by the window and opened her sketch pad, running her fingers over the drawing she had made the night before. "Emma," her teacher, Miss Parker, said as she walked by. "That's beautiful. Is it new?" Emma hesitated. She rarely shared her work with anyone, but something in Ms. Parker's kind expression made her nod. Ms. Parker pulled up a chair. "You have a real talent," she said, studying the drawing closely. "There's so much emotion in this piece. What inspired it?" Emma shrugged, unsure how to put her feelings into words. Ms. Parker leaned forward. "Art can be a powerful way to express what we're feeling, even when it's hard to say out loud. If you ever want to talk about what's on your mind, my door is always open." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. Ms. Parker's kindness caught her off guard. She had grown so used to feeling invisible, like her problems didn't matter, but here was someone offering to listen. "Thanks," Emma said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. As the class went on, Emma found herself looking at the storm cloud drawing with new eyes. Maybe it wasn't just a picture. Maybe it was a way to take the first step towards something better. She didn't know how yet, but she felt a tiny spark of hope flicker inside her. For the first time in weeks, Emma thought maybe things could change. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Emma walked home from school. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, though it carried the same books and supplies it always did. It wasn't the weight of her belongings, it was the thoughts swirling in her mind. Ms. Parker's words lingered with her. Art can be a powerful way to express what we're feeling. Emma hadn't spoken much about her feelings to anyone, not even her parents. She couldn't find the right words to describe the way the tension at home wrapped around her chest like a vice. When she turned onto Maple Street, her heart sank. Ryan's old car was parked in the driveway, its rusted hood glinting faintly in the sunlight. He was home early, which was never a good sign. Emma braced herself as she stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of the spaghetti sauce her mother had left simmering in the slow cooker. The sound of the television came from the living room, where she found Ryan sprawled on the couch, flipping mindlessly through channels. "Hey," she said cautiously, sliding off her shoes. Ryan barely glanced at her. "Where have you been?" "School," Emma replied, keeping her voice neutral. "You could have fooled me," he muttered, tossing the remote onto the coffee table. Emma ignored him and made her way to her room, shutting the door behind her. She sat on her bed and pulled out her sketch pad. For a moment, she stared at the storm cloud drawing she had finished the night before. The lines felt heavier now, almost suffocating. She flipped to a blank page, but before she could begin, there was a knock at her door. "What?" she called, already tensing. Ryan pushed the door open without waiting for a response. His sharp features were set in a scowl, and Emma noticed the faint smell of cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket. "Mom said you talked to someone at school about me," he said, his voice low and accusatory. Emma frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Emma," Ryan snapped. "Miss Parker, or whatever her name is. She asked Mom about me. You said something, didn't you?" Emma's pulse quickened. She hadn't mentioned Ryan's name to Miss Parker, but the accusation in his tone was enough to make her feel guilty. "I didn't say anything about you," she said firmly, clutching her sketchpad. Ryan stepped closer, towering over her. "You're lying. What did you tell her? That I'm the bad guy?" "I didn't." Emma's voice cracked. Ryan's gaze fell to her sketchpad, and his lips curled into a sneer. "Still wasting your time with this?" "Leave it alone," Emma said quickly, pulling the sketchpad closer to her chest. "Why?" he shot back. "So you can show it to more people and make me look like the villain?" "I'm not trying to make you look like anything," Emma said, her voice rising despite herself. "You're doing that all on your own." Ryan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Emma thought he might yell at her or worse. But then he stepped back, shaking his head. "Just stay out of my business," he said, his voice low and cold. "And keep your mouth shut." He turned and left, slamming the door behind him. Emma sat frozen for a long moment, her heart pounding. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them away. She felt a mixture of fear and anger bubbling inside her, fear of what Ryan might do if things got worse, and anger at herself for always backing down. The next morning, Emma left for school early, eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. She walked briskly, her backpack bouncing against her back. The October air was crisp, filling her lungs with a sharp chill that helped steady her nerves. By the time she arrived at the art room, most of the other students were still lingering in the hallways. Miss Parker was arranging supplies on a shelf, humming softly to herself. She looked up when Emma entered. "Emma, you're here early," she said with a warm smile. Emma hesitated near the door, clutching the strap of her backpack. "Can I show you something?" "Of course," Miss Parker said, motioning for Emma to sit. Emma pulled out her sketch pad, flipping to the storm cloud drawing. She placed it on the table, her fingers lingering on the edges of the page. Miss Parker studied the drawing for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "This is powerful," she said finally. "What inspired it?" Emma shifted in her seat. "I don't know," she said softly. "It's just how I feel sometimes." Miss Parker nodded. "Art has a way of bringing those feelings to the surface. It's like a mirror, showing us what's inside." Emma looked down at her hands. "I don't know what to do with it, though." "You don't have to do anything right away," Miss Parker said gently. "But if you ever feel like talking about it, I'm here. Sometimes just sharing what's on your mind can make a big difference." Emma bit her lip, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to tell Miss Parker everything about Ryan, about the tension at home, about the fear that seemed to follow her everywhere. But another part of her held back, afraid of what might happen if she spoke up. "Thanks," she said finally. As the day went on, Emma found herself thinking more and more about Ms. Parker's words. She had always used her art as a way to process her feelings, but maybe there was more she could do. Maybe she didn't have to carry everything on her own. That evening, as Emma walked home, she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Green, in her garden. The older woman waved when she saw Emma and called her over. "Hi, Emma," Mrs. Green said, brushing dirt off her hands. "How was school today?" "It was okay," Emma said, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Mrs. Green tilted her head, studying Emma's face. "You look like you've got something on your mind," she said kindly. Emma hesitated. She wasn't used to people noticing her feelings, let alone asking about them. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Mrs. Green gave her a knowing smile. "Well, if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me. Sometimes it helps to get things off your chest." Emma nodded, her throat tight with unspoken words. As she walked the rest of the way home, Mrs. Green's kindness stayed with her. It reminded her of Ms. Parker's offer to listen, and for the first time, Emma wondered if she could really share the weight of her secrets with someone else. When she got to her room, she opened her sketch pad and began to draw. This time, the lines came faster, more urgent. She drew a girl standing in front of a storm, her arms stretched wide as if trying to shield herself from the chaos. The girl looked small, but there was strength in her stance, a quiet determination that Emma hoped she could find in herself. The house was unusually quiet when Emma got home. The soft glow of the setting sun spilled through the windows, casting long shadows across the walls. Her parents weren't home yet, which wasn't surprising. They often worked late shifts. But Ryan's absence left an unsettling stillness in the air, as if the house were holding its breath. Emma dropped her backpack by the door and moved to the kitchen, where a note lay on the counter. It was in her mother's handwriting, hurried but clear. Leftovers in the fridge. Call if you need us. Love, Mom. Emma sighed and opened the fridge, pulling out a plate of spaghetti. She reheated it in the microwave, but the warmth of the food did little to ease the chill that seemed to settle in her chest. She brought the plate to the dining table and tried to focus on eating, but her mind kept drifting to the events of the past week. Ryan's threats, Miss Parker's gentle encouragement, Mrs. Green's kind offer, they all swirled in her thoughts, leaving her restless. Emma looked toward the living room, where her sketchpad rested on the coffee table. She had left it there earlier, hoping that sketching in the open might make her feel less alone. But before she could move, the front door swung open, and Ryan stepped inside. "Where have you been?" Emma asked, her voice cautious. Ryan didn't answer right away. His jacket was wrinkled, and his shoes were caked in mud, as though he had been walking through the woods. He dropped a crumpled receipt on the table and gave her a sharp look. "Don't worry about it," he muttered, brushing past her toward the fridge. Emma watched as he rummaged through the shelves, pulling out a soda. He popped the can open and leaned against the counter, his eyes scanning the room. "Mom and Dad aren't home?" "They're working late," Emma said, trying to keep her tone neutral. Ryan smirked. "Figures. Always too busy for their precious golden child." Emma bristled. "That's not true, isn't it?" Ryan shot back, his voice laced with bitterness. "You think they'd care this much if it were me?" "You don't know that," Emma said, her voice trembling. Ryan shook his head and took a long sip of his soda. "You don't get it, do you? You're their favorite. Always have been, and you don't even realize it." Emma's hands tightened into fists under the table. "If I'm their favorite, then why do I feel like everything's falling apart?" For a moment, Ryan's expression softened, and Emma thought he might actually answer her. But then his usual smirk returned, and he pushed off the counter. "Whatever," he said, heading for his room. "Just stay out of my way." That night, Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her conversation with Ryan replayed in her mind, each word cutting deeper than she cared to admit. She hated the way he twisted things, making her feel guilty for problems she didn't create. But she also hated the way she always stayed quiet, letting him dominate every argument. Emma sat up and turned on her bedside lamp. Her sketchpad was on her desk, its pages filled with drawings of storm clouds, shadows, and small figures struggling against overwhelming odds. She flipped through them slowly, her fingers tracing the lines. When she reached the newest drawing, the girl shielding herself from the storm, Emma paused. There was strength in that figure, strength she wanted to find in herself. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Ms. Parker. "Hi, Emma. Just wanted to remind you about the community art program this Saturday. Let me know if you're interested. I think you'd really enjoy it." Emma stared at the message for a long moment. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to retreat into the safety of her room where no one could see how uncertain she felt. But another part of her, the part that had drawn the girl standing against the storm, told her to take a chance. She typed a quick response, "I'll be there." Saturday arrived faster than Emma expected. The community art program was held at a small studio downtown, its walls lined with colorful paintings and photographs. The air smelled faintly of paint and fresh coffee, and soft instrumental music played in the background. Emma hesitated in the doorway, clutching her sketchpad tightly. She felt out of place among the other participants, most of whom were older and seemed confident in their work. "Emma," Ms. Parker's voice cut through her nerves. The teacher approached with a warm smile, holding a mug of tea. "I'm so glad you came." Emma nodded, her grip on her sketchpad relaxing slightly. "Come on, I'll show you around," Ms. Parker said, leading her into the studio. "You can set up wherever you're comfortable." Emma chose a spot near the window, where the sunlight streamed in. She opened her sketch pad and began to draw, her pencil moving in slow, deliberate strokes. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease as she focused on the paper, the chaos of the past week fading into the background. As she worked, a man approached her table. He was older, with silver hair and kind eyes, and he carried a portfolio under one arm. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked. Emma shook her head, and he placed his portfolio on the table. "I'm Mark Collins," he said, extending a hand. "I help run this program." "Emma Carter," she replied, shaking his hand. Mark glanced at her sketch pad, his eyes lighting up. "That's incredible," he said, pointing to the storm cloud drawing. "There's so much emotion in this piece. Have you shown your work anywhere before?" Emma shook her head, her cheeks flushing. "No, it's just something I do for myself." "Well, you've got real talent," Mark said. "Have you ever thought about entering an art showcase? We have one coming up next month." Emma blinked. "I don't think I'm ready for something like that." "Everyone starts somewhere," Mark said with a smile. "Think about it. Your work deserves to be seen." By the time Emma left the studio that afternoon, her heart felt lighter. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. Mark's words echoed in her mind as she walked home. Maybe her drawings weren't just a way to escape. Maybe they were a way to connect, to share her story with others. When she arrived home, the house was quiet again. Her parents were still at work, and Ryan's car was gone. Emma went to her room and placed her sketchpad on her desk, staring at the storm cloud drawing. Mark's encouragement had planted a seed of hope in her mind. She didn't know if she was ready to share her work with the world, but for the first time, she thought it might be possible. And that thought was enough to make her pick up her pencil and begin to draw again. The late afternoon sun filtered through Emma's bedroom window as she sat at her desk, staring at the storm cloud drawing in her sketchpad. Her pencil hovered just above the paper, but she didn't know what to add. She wanted to make the figures stronger, more confident, but every time she tried, her hand froze. The quiet hum of the house was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening and closing. Emma tensed. Ryan was home. She glanced at the clock on her wall. Her parents wouldn't be back for hours, leaving her alone with her brother. Her stomach twisted as she heard his footsteps in the hallway. Moments later, Ryan knocked on her door, not a gentle knock, but the kind that made her shoulders jump. "Emma, open up." She considered pretending she wasn't there, but knew it wouldn't work. Ryan always had a way of getting what he wanted. Reluctantly, she got up and opened the door a crack. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Ryan leaned against the doorframe, his sharp eyes narrowing. "Why are you acting weird?" "I'm not," Emma said quickly. Ryan pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. His presence filled the small space, making it feel claustrophobic. He looked around, his gaze landing on her sketchpad. "You've been spending a lot of time with that stupid thing," he said, nodding toward it. "What are you even drawing in there?" "It's none of your business," Emma said, crossing her arms protectively. Ryan smirked, his tone dripping with mockery. "Oh, I see. You think you're some kind of artist now. Just leave me alone," Emma muttered, stepping back. Ryan's expression darkened. "Don't talk to me like that," he snapped. "You think you're better than me? You're not." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She hated the way Ryan's words made her feel small, like her voice didn't matter. Before she could respond, Ryan grabbed the sketchpad off her desk and flipped it open. "Hey!" Emma lunged forward, trying to snatch it back, but he held it out of reach. He leafed through the pages, his smirk returning. "What's this? A little girl standing in a storm? How cute. Give it back." Emma's voice broke as she reached for the sketchpad again. Ryan's laughter was sharp and cruel. "You really think this stuff matters? It's just a bunch of stupid pictures." Something inside Emma snapped. "You don't get to decide what matters to me," she shouted, her hands trembling. Ryan froze for a moment, startled by her outburst. But his expression quickly hardened, and he tossed the sketchpad onto the floor. "Whatever," he muttered, brushing past her on his way out. "You're such a baby." Emma dropped to her knees, gathering the scattered pages. Her hands shook as she smoothed out the crumpled edges, tears stinging her eyes. She felt like she was drowning, her emotions crashing over her like waves. Ryan's words echoed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. She sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the storm cloud drawing. The girl in the picture looked small and fragile, just like Emma felt. But then she remembered Mark's encouragement at the art program. Your work deserves to be seen. Emma took a deep breath and wiped her tears. She carefully placed her sketchpad back on her desk and grabbed her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the screen as she scrolled through her contacts. Ms. Parker's name stared back at her, and Emma's chest tightened. She wasn't sure if she could actually tell someone what was happening at home. But then she thought of Mrs. Green's kind words earlier that week. Sometimes it helps to get things off your chest. Emma tapped the message icon and started typing. Montserrat Parker. I need to talk to someone. Are you free after school tomorrow? The next day, Emma arrived at the art room early, clutching her sketchpad tightly. The familiar smell of paint and charcoal filled the air, offering a small sense of comfort. Miss Parker looked up from her desk and smiled. Emma, come on in. Emma hesitated in the doorway, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure where to start or how much to say. Ms. Parker's smile softened. Take your time, she said, gesturing to a chair. I'm here to listen. Emma sat down, her fingers tracing the edges of her sketchpad. For a moment, she stared at the floor, unable to meet Ms. Parker's gaze. Finally, she spoke. It's about my brother, she said quietly. Ms. Parker nodded, her expression patient. Emma's voice wavered as she continued. He's been really mean lately. He says awful things, and sometimes he takes my stuff. I don't know what to do. Ms. Parker leaned forward, her tone gentle. That sounds really hard, Emma. Have you talked to your parents about it? Emma shook her head. They're always working, and when they are home, they're too tired to deal with Ryan. Ms. Parker frowned slightly, but didn't push. It sounds like you're carrying a lot on your own. Emma's throat tightened. I feel like I can't breathe sometimes, she admitted. Ms. Parker placed a comforting hand on the table between them. Thank you for sharing that with me, Emma. You're very brave for speaking up. Emma looked up surprised. I don't feel brave, she said. Bravery isn't about not being scared, Ms. Parker said with a small smile. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Emma didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded. Ms. Parker reached for a flyer on her desk and slid it across the table. There's a counselor who works with students here at school. She's really kind, and she's great at helping with situations like this. Would you like me to set up a time for you to meet her? Emma hesitated. The idea of talking to a stranger about her family felt overwhelming. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't keep everything bottled up forever. Okay, she said finally. Ms. Parker smiled. I'll make sure she knows to take it slow. And remember, you're not alone in this, Emma. That evening, Emma sat at her desk, staring at her sketchpad. The storm cloud drawing still felt unfinished, but she didn't know what to add. Then she picked up her pencil and began to sketch something new. She added a figure next to the girl, standing under the same storm. This one was taller, holding an umbrella that stretched over both of them. When she finished, Emma leaned back and studied the drawing. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she didn't have to face the storm alone. The school counselor's office was a small, quiet space tucked into the corner of the administration building. Sunlight streamed through the single window, falling across a bookshelf filled with titles like Building Bridges and Helping Kids Heal. Emma sat on the edge of a chair, clutching her sketchpad in her lap. The counselor, Ms. Rhodes, smiled warmly from behind her desk. She was younger than Emma had expected, with curly hair pulled back into a neat ponytail and a soothing voice that reminded Emma of the sound of gentle rain. I'm really glad you're here, Emma, Ms. Rhodes said, folding her hands on the desk. Ms. Parker told me a little bit about what's been going on, but I'd like to hear from you when you're ready. Emma hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. She had spent the entire morning rehearsing what she might say, but now that the moment had come, her throat felt tight. Ms. Rhodes didn't rush her. She waited patiently, her calm presence making the silence feel less oppressive. Finally, Emma spoke. It's about my brother, she said quietly. Okay, Ms. Rhodes said, her tone encouraging. Tell me what's been happening. Emma shifted in her seat. He says mean things. He takes my stuff. Sometimes he gets really mad, and I don't know what he's going to do. That sounds really tough, Ms. Rhodes said gently. It must feel scary sometimes. Emma nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of her sketchpad. Does he ever hurt you physically? Ms. Rhodes asked carefully. Emma thought for a moment. Not really, she said slowly. But he grabs my arm sometimes, or pushes me if I'm in his way. Ms. Rhodes's brow furrowed slightly, but her expression remained calm. It sounds like you've been carrying a lot on your own. I guess, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Rhodes leaned forward slightly. You don't have to handle this all by yourself, Emma. There are people who can help me, Ms. Parker, even your parents. Emma bit her lip. My parents are always busy. They already have so much to deal with because of Ryan. That may be true, Ms. Rhodes said, but you're their daughter, and your feelings matter too. Sometimes families need help to work through things together, and that's okay. Emma didn't respond right away. She stared at the sketch pad in her lap, the faint outlines of her latest drawing visible through the cover. Do you want to show me what you've been working on? Ms. Rhodes asked, nodding toward the sketch pad. Emma hesitated, but then opened it to the page with the two figures standing under the storm. Ms. Rhodes studied the drawing for a moment, her expression thoughtful. This is beautiful, she said finally. It looks like the taller figure is offering support. Is that right? Emma nodded. I guess I was thinking about what Ms. Parker said about not having to face everything alone. That's an important realization, Ms. Rhodes said. It's okay to ask for help, Emma. You're already taking a big step by being here today. By the time the session ended, Emma felt a little lighter, though the knots in her chest hadn't fully loosened. Ms. Rhodes had encouraged her to talk to her parents about what was happening and had offered to help facilitate the conversation if Emma needed it. As Emma walked home, her thoughts swirled like leaves in the wind. She wasn't sure how to bring up the subject with her parents. Would they believe her? Or would they think she was just trying to cause more problems? When she turned onto Maple Street, she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Green, tending to her garden. The older woman looked up and waved. Hi, Emma, Mrs. Green called. How was school? Emma smiled faintly. It was okay. Mrs. Green wiped her hands on her gardening apron and stepped closer to the fence. You've been looking a little down lately. Everything all right? Emma hesitated. She had always liked Mrs. Green, who often brought over cookies or helped her family with small favors. But sharing her problems felt like crossing an invisible line. It's just stuff at home, Emma said finally. Mrs. Green's brow furrowed with concern. Do you want to talk about it? Sometimes it helps to let things out. Emma shook her head. It's complicated. Well, Mrs. Green said gently, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. Emma nodded, her chest tightening with gratitude. Mrs. Green's kindness felt like a small ray of light breaking through the storm clouds in her mind. That evening, Emma sat at the kitchen table, working on her newest drawing while her parents cooked dinner. Her mother hummed softly as she stirred a pot of soup, and her father chopped vegetables with steady precision. Ryan hadn't come home yet, and the atmosphere in the house felt calmer without him. Emma, her mother said, glancing over her shoulder. How was school today? It was fine, Emma said, keeping her focus on her drawing. Her father set down the cutting board and leaned against the counter. You've been spending a lot of time with that sketch pad lately. What are you working on? Emma hesitated, unsure if she wanted to share. But then she remembered Ms. Rhodes's advice about opening up. She turned the sketch pad around to show them the drawing of the figures under the storm. Her mother stepped closer, wiping her hands on a dish towel. This is beautiful, Emma, she said, her voice soft with admiration. What does it mean? Emma shrugged. I guess it's about feeling like you're not alone when things get hard. Her father nodded thoughtfully. That's a powerful message. You're really talented, Emma. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. Is everything okay, sweetie? You seem a little quiet lately. Emma hesitated, her chest tightening. She wanted to tell them everything, but the words caught in her throat. Before she could respond, the front door slammed open, and Ryan stormed inside. His face was red, and his movements were jerky, like he was barely holding himself together. Ryan, what's going on? Their father asked, his tone sharp with concern. Nothing, Ryan snapped, kicking off his shoes. Why do you always assume it's something bad? Because you've been acting out for weeks, their mother said, crossing her arms. We can't keep ignoring this, Ryan. Ryan glared at her, his jaw tightening. Maybe if you weren't always on my case, I wouldn't have to act out. Ryan, just leave me alone. Ryan shouted before storming down the hallway and slamming his bedroom door. The tension in the air was palpable. Emma's parents exchanged a worried glance, but neither said anything. Emma stared at her drawing, her hands trembling slightly. The peaceful moment from earlier had shattered, replaced by the familiar weight of uncertainty and fear. Her mother sighed deeply and rubbed her temples. "I don't know what to do with him anymore," she admitted. Her father nodded grimly. "We'll figure it out," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Emma clenched her fists under the table, frustration bubbling in her chest. She was tired of watching her family fall apart. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for things to change on their own. That night, Emma sat at her desk, staring at the sketchpad. She picked up her pencil and began adding to the drawing, her strokes bold and deliberate. She added a third figure to the scene, smaller, but standing firmly beside the others under the storm. Emma wasn't sure where the journey would lead, but for the first time, she felt like she had taken a step towards something better. The morning air was crisp as Emma walked to school, her sketchpad tucked securely under her arm. She had spent most of the night finishing her newest drawing, 3 figures standing together under the storm. The smallest one, her representation, was no longer cowering. Instead, it stood tall, its hand outstretched toward the others. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things could get better if she kept taking small steps. Her thoughts drifted to Ms. Rhodes's advice about talking to her parents. It wouldn't be easy, but she knew it was necessary. Ryan's anger wasn't just his problem anymore, it was affecting all of them. At school, Emma felt the usual swirl of energy around her. Students chatting in the hallways, teachers preparing for their lessons. But she felt apart from it all. Her mind focused on the conversation she hoped to have with her parents that evening. In our class, Miss Parker stopped by Emma's desk. "That's beautiful," Miss Parker said, gesturing to the drawing Emma had brought with her. "You've really captured a sense of strength and connection here." Emma smiled shyly. "Thanks. Are you planning to share this at the Community Art Showcase?" Miss Parker asked. Emma hesitated. She hadn't considered it seriously before, but the thought of showing her work to others was both thrilling and terrifying. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "You should," Miss Parker said with a warm smile. "Your work has a way of speaking to people. It could really inspire someone." The idea lingered in Emma's mind for the rest of the day. Could her drawings help someone else? Maybe even someone feeling as lost as she had been? That evening, Emma walked into the kitchen to find her parents preparing dinner. Her mother was chopping vegetables, while her father stirred a pot on the stove. The comforting aroma of chicken soup filled the air. "Can we talk?" Emma asked hesitantly, standing near the table. Her mother looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Emma sat down, clutching her sketchpad for reassurance. "It's about Ryan," she said quietly. Her parents exchanged a glance. "What about him?" her father asked, setting the spoon down. Emma took a deep breath. He's been really angry lately, and sometimes he scares me." Her mother's hand froze mid-chop. "Scares you? What do you mean?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to say. "He says mean things, and he takes my stuff without asking. He grabbed my arm the other day, and it hurt." Her mother's face fell, and her father's jaw tightened. "I didn't want to bother you," Emma continued, her voice trembling. "I know you're already worried about him, but I didn't know what else to do." Her mother set down the knife and walked over to Emma, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Honey, you should have told us sooner," she said softly. Her father nodded, his expression grave. "We've been so focused on trying to help Ryan that we didn't see what it was doing to you." Before Emma could respond, the front door slammed open, and Ryan stomped inside. His face was flushed, and his movements were jerky with anger. "What now?" he muttered, kicking off his shoes. "We need to talk, Ryan," their father said firmly, crossing his arms. Ryan froze, his eyes narrowing. "About what?" "About your behavior," their mother said, her tone unusually sharp. "Emma just told us some things that are very concerning." Ryan's gaze flicked to Emma, and his expression darkened. "What did you say?" Emma's chest tightened, but she forced herself to hold his glare. "The truth," she said quietly. Ryan took a step forward, but their father quickly stepped between them. "That's enough," their father said, his voice calm but commanding. "We're not going to let this continue, Ryan." Ryan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You're always blaming me. Maybe if you weren't such lousy parents, I wouldn't have to deal with all this." His words hit like a slap, but their father didn't flinch. "This isn't about blame," their father said firmly. "It's about finding a way to help you and protect this family." Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "Help me? You don't care about me. You just want me out of the way." "That's not true," their mother said, her voice trembling. "But we can't ignore what's happening anymore. We're going to get you into counseling, Ryan." Ryan scoffed and turned toward the door. "Yeah, right? Like I'm going to waste my time with that." "If you don't cooperate," their father said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "you won't have a choice." Ryan froze, his shoulders tense. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means we'll take whatever steps are necessary to keep this family safe," their father said. For a moment, the room was so silent that Emma could hear her own heartbeat. Then Ryan spun around and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The next few hours were a blur. Emma's parents tried to reassure her, but the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. Later that night, Emma sat in her room, staring at her sketchpad. She felt drained, like the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. But as she flipped through the pages of her drawings, something shifted. Each image told a part of her story, the struggles, the fears, and the small moments of courage that had carried her through. She thought about Ms. Parker's words at school. Maybe her drawings really could inspire someone else. Emma picked up her pencil and began to sketch. This time, she drew a sunrise breaking through the storm clouds, casting light over the three figures below. The smallest figure stood with its head held high, its arms outstretched toward the light. When she finished, Emma looked at the drawing and felt a spark of hope. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, she believed there was a way through it. The morning light streamed through Emma's bedroom window, illuminating her latest drawing on the desk. The sunrise breaking through the storm clouds felt like a small triumph, proof that, even in the chaos of her family's struggles, there was a glimmer of hope. At school, Emma carried her sketchpad with her, feeling more connected to her art than ever before. It wasn't just a way to process her feelings anymore, it was a way to communicate, to share her truth without needing words. As the day went on, the tension from the previous evening lingered in her mind. Her parents' confrontation with Ryan had been both terrifying and necessary, and she wasn't sure what would happen next. But for the first time, she felt like she had a voice in her family, and that gave her a sense of quiet strength. During art class, Ms. Parker stopped by Emma's desk. "Have you thought any more about the community art showcase?" Ms. Parker asked, her warm smile reassuring. Emma hesitated, her fingers tracing the edges of her sketchpad. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. Ms. Parker knelt beside her, lowering her voice. "Emma, your art has a way of telling a story, a powerful story. You've come so far already. Sharing your work could be a way to inspire others who might be struggling, just like you were." Emma looked down at her drawing of the sunrise. She thought about how much her art had helped her through the darkest moments, and how sharing it might help someone else feel less alone. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll do it." Miss Parker beamed. "I'm so proud of you, Emma. You're going to make a difference." After school, Emma walked home, her sketchpad tucked securely under her arm. The house was quiet when she arrived, and for once, it felt peaceful. Her parents weren't home yet, and Ryan's car was nowhere to be seen. Emma sat at the kitchen table and opened her sketchpad, flipping through her drawings. Each page felt like a piece of her journey, the storm clouds, the figures under the storm, and now the sunrise breaking through. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. She looked up to see Ryan stepping inside, his shoulders slumped and his face drawn. He didn't say anything, just kicked off his shoes and walked to the fridge. "Ryan," Emma said hesitantly. He turned to look at her, his expression wary. "What?" Emma took a deep breath. "Are you okay?" Ryan's brow furrowed, and for a moment, Emma thought he might lash out. But then his shoulders sagged, and he leaned against the counter. "I don't know," he admitted. The vulnerability in his voice caught Emma off guard. Ryan rarely let his guard down, especially around her. "Mom and Dad just want to help you," Emma said carefully. Ryan scoffed, but it lacked his usual bitterness. "Yeah, right? They think I'm a screw-up." "That's not true," Emma said firmly. "They're worried about you. We all are. Ryan looked away, his jaw tightening. It doesn't matter, he muttered. I'm already too far gone. Emma stood up, her heart pounding. It's not too late, Ryan. You can still turn things around. Ryan didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed a soda from the fridge and walked to his room, shutting the door behind him. Emma sat back down, her chest heavy with unspoken words. She didn't know if her brother would listen, but she hoped that something she had said would stick with him. That Saturday, Emma arrived at the community art studio for the showcase. The room buzzed with energy as artists set up their displays, each one eager to share their work with the audience that would soon arrive. Emma's stomach churned with nerves as she arranged her drawings on the table. Ms. Parker stood nearby, offering her encouragement. You're going to do great, Ms. Parker said, placing a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder. As the event began, people started filtering into the studio, their voices filling the space with warmth and excitement. Emma stayed by her table, watching nervously as attendees stopped to admire the artwork. A woman in a blue cardigan approached Emma's table and studied the drawings. These are beautiful, the woman said, her eyes lingering on the drawing of the storm cloud figures. What inspired this one? Emma hesitated, unsure how much to share. But then she thought about Ms. Parker's words, the idea of her story helping someone else. It's about going through hard times, Emma said carefully, and how you don't have to face them alone. The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's a powerful message, she said softly. Thank you for sharing it. As the woman moved on, Emma felt a sense of pride she hadn't expected. Her art was making an impact, even in small ways. Toward the end of the showcase, Mark Collins, one of the program's coordinators, approached Emma's table. Emma, your work has been a big hit tonight, he said with a smile. I've had several people tell me how much it resonated with them. Emma's cheeks flushed. Really? Really, Mark said. In fact, I think your story could reach an even bigger audience. Have you ever thought about entering a regional art competition? Emma blinked in surprise. A competition? Mark nodded. Your work has a depth and honesty that judges look for. I'd be happy to help you prepare if you're interested. Emma's heart raced. The idea of sharing her work on a larger scale was both exciting and terrifying. I'll think about it, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. That evening, Emma returned home feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The showcase had been a success, and for the first time, she felt like her art had a purpose beyond her own healing. As she stepped inside, she found her parents sitting at the kitchen table, deep in conversation. They looked up as she entered. How was the showcase? Her mother asked. It was amazing, Emma said, her smile widening. Her father nodded, his expression thoughtful. We're proud of you, Emma. You've worked so hard. Emma hesitated, then took a seat at the table. I think I want to keep sharing my art. Maybe even enter a competition. Her mother beamed. That's wonderful, sweetie. We'll support you however we can. For the first time, Emma felt truly seen and supported. The storm that had hung over her family was still there, but it didn't feel so overwhelming anymore. As she sat with her parents, she thought about Ryan and the small moment of vulnerability he had shown earlier that week. Maybe, with time and patience, they could help him find his way out of the storm too. The week after the art showcase was a blur for Emma. The success of the event had given her a sense of purpose, but her thoughts kept returning to Ryan. Since their conversation in the kitchen, he had been quieter than usual, almost withdrawn. Her parents had started arranging counseling sessions for him, but Emma wasn't sure if he would follow through. Late Thursday afternoon, the phone rang, breaking the usual after-school silence. Emma was in the living room sketching when her mother picked it up. Hello, her mother said, her voice carrying a mix of caution and curiosity. Emma glanced up, watching her mother's face shift from mild concern to shock. When? Are you sure? Her mother said, gripping the phone tightly. She nodded a few times before hanging up and pressing her hand to her forehead. Mom, what's wrong? Emma asked, setting her pencil down. Her mother hesitated, then sat on the couch beside her. That was the school. They've been contacted by someone from the county court. Ryan is being called to appear in a hearing. Emma's stomach dropped. A hearing? Why? Her mother exhaled shakily. It's about the money he took. Apparently, the family he borrowed from press charges. Emma's heart pounded. She had known about Ryan's reckless decisions, but she hadn't realized how far they had spiraled. Is he in trouble? Emma asked. Her mother nodded. He could be, but it depends on what happens in court. We'll have to explain everything to the judge. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. The weekend passed in a haze of anxiety for Emma's family. Her parents tried to reassure her that everything would work out, but their tight-lipped conversations behind closed doors told a different story. Ryan barely spoke to anyone, spending most of his time locked in his room. Emma wanted to reach out, to say something that might help, but every time she approached his door, her courage faltered. By Monday morning, the tension in the house was palpable. Emma rode to the courthouse with her parents, sitting silently in the back seat. Ryan followed in his own car, his face unreadable as he parked and joined them at the entrance. The courthouse was a stark building with high ceilings and polished floors that seemed to amplify every sound. Emma clung to her mother's side as they made their way to the small hearing room. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The judge sat at a raised bench, flipping through a file as Ryan was called forward. Emma and her parents sat behind him, their breath shallow as the hearing began. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, looked over her glasses at Ryan. Mr. Carter, you are here today because of allegations that you took money from another family under false pretenses. Do you understand the charges against you? Ryan nodded, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Yes, Your Honor. The judge's gaze shifted to their parents. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, have you been made aware of your son's actions? Yes, their father said, his voice steady but strained. We've been trying to address the situation as a family. And what steps have you taken? The judge asked. We've arranged for counseling, their mother said. We're doing everything we can to help him. The judge nodded, her expression softening slightly. That's a good start. However, this court must also consider the impact of his actions on others. The family that Ryan had borrowed money from was called forward. They were a middle-aged couple, their expressions a mix of frustration and sadness. The man explained how Ryan had approached them, claiming he needed help with emergency expenses. We wanted to believe him, the man said. But when we found out he'd used the money for other things, we felt betrayed. Emma's chest tightened as she watched Ryan lower his head, unable to meet the couple's gaze. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, the room fell silent. The judge folded her hands and leaned forward slightly. Mr. Carter, this is your opportunity to explain yourself. Is there anything you'd like to say? Ryan hesitated, his shoulders tense. For a moment, Emma thought he might stay silent. But then he lifted his head and spoke, his voice low but clear. I messed up, he said. I know what I did was wrong, and I wish I could take it back. I didn't know what else to do. What do you mean by that? The judge asked. Ryan swallowed hard. I was trying to fix things. I felt like I was already a failure, and I didn't want to admit how bad it had gotten. So, I lied and I hurt people, and now I'm here. The vulnerability in his voice caught everyone off guard, including Emma. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, though she wasn't sure why. The judge regarded Ryan for a long moment before speaking. Acknowledging your mistakes is an important step, Mr. Carter. But actions have consequences, and it's this court's responsibility to determine what those consequences should be. After a brief recess, the judge announced her decision. Ryan would be required to complete community service and attend counseling as part of a court-mandated program. He would also need to repay the money he had taken. This is an opportunity for you to rebuild trust, both with your family and the community, the judge said firmly. I hope you'll take it seriously. Ryan nodded, his expression subdued. I will, Your Honor. As they left the courthouse, the air felt lighter, though the weight of the situation still lingered. I'm proud of you for owning up to what you did, their father said, placing a hand on Ryan's shoulder. Ryan didn't respond, but he didn't shrug it off either. That evening, Emma found Ryan sitting on the porch, staring out at the fading sunset. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down beside him. Today was hard, Emma said softly. Ryan nodded. Yeah. They sat in silence for a while, the tension between them easing with each passing moment. Do you think things will get better? Ryan asked eventually, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Emma glanced at him, surprised by the question. I think they can, but it'll take time. Ryan nodded again, and for the first time in a long while, Emma saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. That night, Emma added another figure to her latest, drawing a fourth person standing under the storm, their hand outstretched toward the others. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Emma believed they could face it together. The days following the hearing brought a cautious sense of calm to the Carter household. Ryan started attending his court-mandated counseling sessions, and though he remained quiet and withdrawn, there was a noticeable change in his demeanor. He seemed less angry, more reflective, as if the weight of everything was finally sinking in. Emma watched him carefully from a distance, unsure whether to believe that this change would last. Part of her wanted to reach out, but another part was hesitant, afraid of being pushed away again. Her parents, on the other hand, had thrown themselves fully into the process of healing. Family dinners became more regular, though the conversations often felt strained. Her mother had started leaving work earlier to spend more time at home, while her father offered to drive Ryan to his counseling sessions, hoping to build a bridge that had long been frayed. One evening, after dinner, her father set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing around the table, "maybe we should try something new as a family. Something to bring us together." Emma looked up from her plate, intrigued. "Like what?" "Well," her father said, scratching his head, "I heard about a local hiking trail that's supposed to be pretty nice. It could be a chance for us to spend some time outdoors away from all the stress." Emma's mother smiled, her eyes lighting up. "That sounds like a great idea. What do you think, Ryan?" Ryan shrugged, but didn't argue. "Sure, I guess." It wasn't exactly enthusiasm, but it was enough to make Emma hopeful. That Saturday, they set out for the trail, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Emma brought her sketch pad, tucking it securely into her backpack, just in case inspiration struck. The trail wound through a dense forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy above. For the first mile, the family walked in relative silence, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. But as the trail began to climb, something shifted. Her father pointed out a bird perched on a nearby branch, and her mother laughed at his overly dramatic imitation of its call. Ryan cracked a small smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emma saw a glimpse of the brother he used to be. "Hey, Emma," Ryan said as they reached a clearing. "What's in the sketch pad?" Emma hesitated, surprised by the question. "Just stuff I've been working on." Ryan nodded toward her backpack. "Can I see?" Her first instinct was to refuse, the memory of his cruel comments about her art still fresh in her mind. But then she noticed the way he was looking at her, not with mockery, but with genuine curiosity. "Okay," she said, pulling out the sketch pad and flipping to the page with the sunrise. Ryan studied the drawing for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "This is really good," he said finally. "You're really good." Emma blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. "Thanks." Ryan handed the sketch pad back to her, a hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You should keep doing this. I don't know. It's like you're telling a story." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. "That's what I'm trying to do," she said softly. The hike turned out to be exactly what they needed. By the time they returned to the car, the tension that had hung over their family for so long felt lighter, as if the fresh air had washed it away. That evening, Emma sat at her desk, her sketch pad open in front of her. She began to draw a new scene: her family, standing together in the clearing, sunlight streaming through the trees. As her pencil moved across the page, she thought about how far they had come. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, she felt like they were walking it together. The next week, Ryan approached Emma in the kitchen while she was making a sandwich. "Hey," he said, leaning against the counter. Emma looked up, surprised. "Hey." Ryan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said. You know, about things getting better." Emma set down the knife she was using. "Yeah, I don't know if I deserve it," Ryan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma frowned. "Why would you think that?" "Because of everything I've done," Ryan said, his shoulders slumping. "All the mistakes I've made, all the people I've hurt. I don't know if I can fix any of it." Emma reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You can't change the past, Ryan, but you can choose what happens next." Ryan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and hope. You really think so? I do, Emma said firmly. For the first time, Ryan smiled a real smile, not the forced, sarcastic smirk she had grown used to. Thanks, Emma, he said. I mean it. As the weeks passed, the changes in their family became more apparent. Ryan started helping around the house, offering to set the table or take out the trash without being asked. He even began opening up during counseling sessions, which their father attended with him for support. Emma continued to focus on her art, pouring her feelings into each new drawing. She decided to enter the regional art competition, with Ms. Parker and Mark Collins offering their guidance. At the same time, her parents began attending family therapy sessions, working together to rebuild the trust and connection that had frayed over the years. One evening, Emma and Ryan sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. Do you think things will ever be normal? Ryan asked, his voice thoughtful. Emma smiled faintly. I don't think there's such a thing as normal, but I think we can find a new way to be okay. Ryan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I like that idea. As the sun dipped below the trees, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The storm that had loomed over their family wasn't gone, but the sunlight breaking through was enough to give her hope. The Saturday morning air was crisp as Emma stood in front of the community center. The regional art competition was being held in the main hall, and from the hum of voices inside, it was clear the event was already buzzing with excitement. Emma clutched her sketch pad to her chest, her heart pounding. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, reworking her drawings and fine-tuning her presentation. Ms. Parker and Mark Collins had been incredibly supportive, offering feedback and encouragement every step of the way. But now, standing at the entrance, doubt began to creep in. What if her work wasn't good enough? What if no one understood her story? Emma. She turned to see her parents and Ryan walking toward her. Her mother held a thermos of tea, and her father carried a camera slung over his shoulder. Ryan had his hands in his pockets, but he offered her a small, encouraging smile. We wouldn't miss this, her father said, patting her shoulder. Are you nervous? Her mother asked gently. Emma nodded. A little. You've got this, Ryan said, surprising her. Seriously, Emma, you're amazing. Emma blinked, feeling her eyes sting. Thanks, Ryan. Inside the hall, the air was filled with the scent of fresh paint and the hum of conversation. Artists of all ages had set up their work on easels and tables, each display telling a unique story. Emma found her assigned spot near the back of the room and began arranging her drawings. She chose a selection that represented her journey: the storm clouds, the figures standing together, and the sunrise breaking through. As she stepped back to survey her display, Mark Collins appeared at her side. Looks fantastic, Emma, he said with a grin. You should be proud. Emma smiled nervously. Thanks, Mark. I just hope people like it. They will, Mark said confidently. Your art has a way of connecting with people. That's what matters most. As the event began, attendees moved from display to display, studying the artwork and chatting with the artists. Emma stood by her table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The first person to stop by was an older woman with kind eyes and a scarf draped over her shoulders. She studied Emma's drawings for a long moment, then turned to her. These are beautiful, the woman said. There's so much emotion in them. What inspired you? Emma hesitated, then took a deep breath. They're about my family, she said softly. We went through a hard time, but we've been working through it together. The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. Thank you for sharing that, she said. Your work has a lot of heart. It's very inspiring. As the woman moved on, Emma felt a small surge of confidence. Throughout the day, more people stopped by her table, offering kind words and asking questions about her art. Each interaction made her feel more at ease, more certain that she had made the right decision to share her story. By mid-afternoon, Emma was beginning to relax. Her family had stayed nearby, offering their quiet support. Ryan even wandered around the hall, returning occasionally with snacks or drinks for Emma. At one point, he leaned against her table, studying her drawings. You know, he said, I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about how it's not too late to turn things around. Emma looked up at him, surprised. Yeah. Ryan nodded, his gaze serious. I want to try. Really try. Not just for Mom and Dad, but for myself. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. That's all anyone can ask for, Ryan. I'm proud of you. Ryan smiled faintly. You've been way braver than I've ever been. If you can do this, maybe I can figure things out too. Emma reached out and squeezed his arm. You've got this. As the event wound down, the judges began announcing the winners. Emma didn't expect to win. She was just proud to have participated, but when her name was called for an honorable mention, her heart soared. Her parents cheered, and Ryan clapped loudly, his grin wide. Emma walked to the front of the room to accept her ribbon, her cheeks flushed with pride. When she returned to her table, her mother hugged her tightly. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Me too, her father added. You've grown so much, Emma. This is just the beginning. Emma smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment that she couldn't quite put into words. That evening, back at home, the family gathered in the living room. Ryan had suggested a movie night, something they hadn't done in years. Emma curled up on the couch with a blanket, her ribbon resting on the coffee table beside her. As the opening credits rolled, she glanced around the room. Her parents sat close together, their hands intertwined. Ryan was stretched out in the armchair, a bowl of popcorn balanced on his lap. For the first time in a long while, the house felt warm, safe, and whole. Later that night, Emma returned to her room and opened her sketchpad. She turned to a fresh page and began to draw, her pencil moving with confidence and purpose. This time, she drew her family standing together in the sunlight, their faces turned toward the future. The storm wasn't completely gone, it might never be, but Emma knew they would face it together, one step at a time. As she finished the drawing, she wrote a small caption at the bottom. Even in the darkest storms, there is light. Thank you for joining Emma's journey, a story of resilience, hope, and the power of family. If you enjoyed this story and want more heartfelt tales that inspire, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you'll never miss a new story. Together, we can shine light on the storms we all face.